Hello, and welcome back to the Irish Tennis Updates podcast. My name is Adam, your host. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe at the moment. This week I've got a different episode to the normal. For the first time on the podcast, I'm speaking to a journalist, Stephen Higgins. Stephen makes regular appearances on national radio to discuss tennis and has his own site, Crosscourt View, dedicated to the sport. I really enjoyed talking to Stephen and getting this alternative view into the world of Irish tennis. I think you'll find this episode really interesting. We talk about the popularity of tennis in Ireland, Stephen's best experiences while covering tournaments, his path into tennis journalism, the challenges he faces, and more. I hope you'll enjoy, so let's get into it. Right, so Stephen, firstly, if you could choose any superpower, what do you think you'd choose and why?
But there's a myriad of choices, but I'm going to be extremely dull and go with flying. I thought a lot of the other stuff would kind of get you into trouble, things like X-ray vision, etc., super strength, super speed. So flying, of all times, I suppose during the pandemic, you certainly missed the ability to move around to different countries. So I would say that'd be top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. So how kind of are you doing during the lockdown? How have the last few months been for you? This new kind of way of life?
I think it has been actually a mix of the start. I was actually fine in terms of, I suppose, the immediacy of March and April, where it's like people are panicking, you're not sure what to do. That I could actually focus a lot on that and the amazing journeys through the web to try get a delivery slot from SuperValu somewhere within 10 counties of you, and all that kind of stuff. I actually thought the focus of just dealing day to day with the stuff was great, or not great, but I could deal with that. But as time dragged on and you saw more of your goals disappear or so, and so like I had already booked tickets for Roland Garros. I was going to go to Wimbledon. I'm really into music, so I had gigs and stuff I was going to go to and festivals. And when they all kind of disappeared, I suppose the weight came down upon you that you don't know when this is going to come back. And I suppose to my advantage, like say I play the piano, so I've had that the whole way through, that you can kind of just go in and nothing else in the world matters. You're just focusing on playing. And actually, since the regulations have eased, tennis coming back has been brilliant. So like I went mad last week. I think I played 5 times last week. So, but it is those things to give you some semblance of normality, to give you something to think about other than, dreadful news every day. So I think it's a mix. I heard Michelle Obama talking about how she's had kind of lost weeks during it, where I've definitely had that a couple of times where you're just kind of, it's very hard to find motivation for stuff because almost all the things you're working towards are off at the moment or so, and you're kind of just trying to figure out what you can kind of work on to keep yourself going or so. But I think in the end you always find something. And I know it's kind of an impossible question, but how do you see the rest of your year going, kind of tennis wise, work wise? The tennis thing, you see, I suppose because I'm based in Ireland, which is not an ideal scenario for a tennis journalist, but the media I have found are primarily just going to be interested in Grand Slams. So they, you'll get some coverage for radio or press stuff if there are Grand Slams. So a lot of it will depend if that happens. I think with the tour itself, they'd almost be better if they just cancelled it for the year, because it's a bit like the Leaving Cert crisis here, where it's just like we're definitely going to have it. I don't know, it's cancelled. That we keep having these build-ups to these tournaments, and will you, won't you, and then it just gets cancelled. So I think this year, in a sense, for the tennis stuff is kind of a write-off. And I've had to focus a lot on other things. I'm still kind of watching and monitoring the stuff, but obviously when Wimbledon cancelled, that was the real kind of sign that this is a different year than other years. This is a generational problem kind of. So I wouldn't be surprised. Like, they're going ahead with the US Open, but there's been a huge spate of withdrawals. Roland Garros, the rate in France has had an uptick again. Like, this thing of going week to week, day to day almost, of, is it still going to go ahead, etc. I don't have huge confidence in any of that stuff for the rest of the year.
No, we'll come back and kind of talk about tennis maybe coming back and what you see happening. I'll come back to that maybe a little bit later, but for now, just to touch on kind of on your kind of early days in tennis. I know you you played as a kid, you had a disease. So just talk to me a little bit about your early days in tennis and how that all
Yes,
went for
I
you.
started playing tennis because of short tennis in my primary school after like mini tennis in the hall kind of
Yeah.
after class, and I went to that and I really loved it. And then when I was about 12, I started to get a limp in my left leg, and I went to get it checked, and it turned out to be a hip problem called Perthes disease, which is quite rare, and basically means that the ball of your hip, which is kind of like that, actually had kind of flattened. It almost like had worn away the top. So I had a really pronounced limp that got worse and a lot of pain. And so I had that for a few years where I had sometimes crutches, sometimes one crutch, sometimes two, etc. Couldn't really do much. Then when I was 15, I had an operation on it, and I had a metal plate inserted along the left hand of the hip, which I still have. And I wasn't really able to get back to doing stuff. Oh yeah, during the time when I couldn't really do other sports or tennis, I could play table tennis a bit.
Okay.
There would still be pain, but you're not moving quite as much. So I actually got really into that, and I played it all the time, and I got decent enough with that representing our school. And because I'm left-handed, like the advantages in tennis would also cross with table tennis. So I played that a lot through secondary school, and I was able to get back to actual tennis 16, 17 or so. I had actually been booked to join Mount Pleasant when I was about 12, and I still had that form of entry, and that just disappeared for like years and years because it was the closest club to where I lived. But then when I got to 16, 17, someone recommended me, or so you should try Temple Oak or so. So I joined Temple Oak about around that time, and I've been there ever since.
Yeah, so throughout kind of school, even as you're not able to play tennis, like how big is tennis in your life? Like, do you watch it all the time? Is it big
like
for
tennis was always. I think I remember back the first big final I watched was probably the '99 Agassi Sampras Wimbledon final.
Okay.
Agassi was my favorite player when I was growing up, and I did everything to try to be like Agassi. I've even done the hairline like Agassi as well. But I had like Agassi's clothes, and I loved returning, and I had a two-handed backhand, and I tried to take the ball really early, which has had awful effects in retrospect of timing. But Agassi was my favorite player, and I loved watching him. And then moving into the era of obviously people like Federer and Justine Henin, they were kind of my favorites. So yeah, I pretty much was watching it all the time from probably 2000 on or 2001. So yeah, it was always there.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of favorite players, but what do you think it was that really drew you to tennis over other sports? What do you think hooked you to tennis?
Yeah, because I think I played loads of different things. I ran when I was younger. I played I played football and stuff. I was better at tennis quicker. Like when I did Parks League and stuff when I was younger, I kind of had a good forehand very quickly. And then I remember going to Trevor Harkness's camps, which were brilliant when I was a kid, and he showed me how to do like a serve and a forehand. And I mean, this is all relative. It'll still be like awful, but relative to who like you're playing with, I had good timing on my forehand quite early, and I kind of enjoyed all the different aspects of tennis, of the feel and touch and different shots and stuff. And it was the same probably when I went to table tennis, that that kind of stuff, maybe the hand-eye coordination of tennis suits me or so better than maybe other stuff. Like I still love football now, but I was much more accomplished at tennis than football. And even when I went back playing there recently, five-a-side up to recent years, I could be okay at football, but I can be pretty good at tennis, like if I'm playing well. And you obviously aren't going to enjoy a sport if you can do more things in that sport than another one.
Absolutely,
I think it just suited me more, particularly I suppose the lefty stuff as well.
Yeah. So I know then in college you studied journalism. So was your ultimate goal always tennis journalism specifically, or how was your kind of vision at that stage?
I think, yes, I knew I wanted to do journalism when I was about 17 or 16, 17. So even when I was doing my going to the guidance counselor about the CEO, it was which journalism course basically. So I knew that quite early. Sports journalism was definitely the way I wanted to go. I remember submitting a article to my English teacher about Rui Costa, who was my favorite footballer growing up. I was always huge into football as well. And I remember submitting that I wasn't asked for it. I just wanted him to see what it was like and whether it'd be good and all. I loved English. I was good at that in school. So it was kind of a natural fit. And when I ended up going to Griffith, and I I don't really mind this time. Like I missed out on DIT by like 10 points that year or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
I had been told Griffith was great. In the end, actually, Griffith was brilliant. It was like a fantastic experience and great practical. And we had a sports journalism module, which I loved. And I think, if I remember right, I interviewed David Gillick when he was still sprinting, and he actually lives near me. And I kind of knew him from years before. And I'm gonna say I got 90-something%, but I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think early on it was going to be journalism. I was going to be sports journalism, and actually in college I did a documentary on Irish tennis players, or like I think it was called "Where Are the Irish Tennis Players?" and that was second year, and it was already in there. It was already kind of I was definitely going that way.
Yeah. So after college, how quickly did that all? Because I know you've worked with RTE, News Talk. Satanta, you've kind of had different jobs around the place, but how quickly did you get into those roles after you finished?
Well, it was funny because we graduated into the crash, into the catastrophe. So I remember such a downbeat commencement speech in third year of journalism, just basically like, yeah, there's no jobs and good luck with that. So when we graduated, there wasn't really much going on, and because it was 2008, so we graduated 2008. And then into 2009, which is kind of like the nadir of the whole situation. So I went back and did a master's. I was still able to get a grant at the time for it, and there was like nothing really happening. And I remember going into the master's in DIT in digital media. So I kind of thought that was somewhat smart to still be in the realm of what I did, but learn lots of new skills. And that's what it was. And it was really hard. But what was great is I was in a class with brilliant people who had been kind of let go just because of circumstances, so like trained architects and graphic designers who had 20 years experience and loads of brilliant people, and I learned so much just from them. And I was only 20 or 21 going into that or something to masters, and it was really hard, but it was brilliant just to have that challenge. And once I got out of that, I was lucky enough after applying a few times to various things that I got into Satanta then as a researcher on their Sunday show called I Talk Sport. And that's kind of where it started then. So that's about 2011, 2012 or something around that time.
Yeah, so I know as well you have your own site called Crosscourt View. So how did that start, and when and how did that all get going?
I think I always wanted to have somewhere where I'd write about tennis, and it was on my mind for years, and I had planned to like set up a site, and then I didn't. And then when I was in News Talk at the time, I kind of just decided that I'd definitely give it a go. And I remember trying out loads of different names for things and seeing what was taking. And I tried it out with some of my friends as well, but that one stuck, and I bought the domain. And then, I started that one with a WordPress site, and that was summer 2015 or so. And I always wanted to do it, and I had put it off, but like the first year when I set it up, the amount of work I put into that was kind of just every day. And like, as you know, like you're doing this stuff out of passion, like, it's not like you're getting riches and rewards for this stuff. And like you want to have your voice and you want to do this stuff. So I put like everything into that in the first year or two just to build it up. And and the thing I suppose I learned is it was so hard to do, and you really have to accept that you'll put loads of work into something and 7 people and a cat might like read it or something like that, but you have to keep pushing to build up your brand. And I remember reading something years ago at the time, which actually made a lot of sense, that the site or blog or whatever that you build up isn't necessarily the thing that kind of makes you the money and does really well for you. It opens up other avenues that will be the thing that can help you out. So the site opened up the opportunity then when someone asked me would I do a radio thing, and that led to other stuff. And then I also got some writing work out of the site because I had written about tennis on the site. So in some ways it was definitely a really good success for giving me some sort of presence as someone who writes about tennis or covers tennis to open up into other avenues. And
what do you think is the hardest thing about running that site?
It can be very frustrating when you don't know how well people will respond to stuff, and you can put a lot of work into something, like a lot, talk to a lot of people, get quotes, all this kind of stuff, and doesn't get traction. And even when you've done stuff for a while, it mightn't get traction just because the way, people are inundated with information all the time. It's incredibly hard to catch someone's catch someone's attention on a news feed with so much, people just become kind of numb to it. So it can be frustrating to put a lot of work into something and it doesn't really get the attention that you want. But I guess it depends on the goals of what you think it should be. Like, I think often people talk about YouTube phenomenons and website phenomenons where someone who was famous in another discipline started a site or started something like that, and then they have 100,000 followers now.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but they had a name recognition before that they could carry over to that. I'm not saying that's not a good thing to set up, but it's different if you just start from the very bottom of just trying to create something and kind of build it through Google, etc. I think the technical stuff of sites, it was challenging as well. At the very start, I did it through WordPress and I didn't really do much coding. But over time, I've learned a lot about kind of how Google search works and analytics, and learned to code a lot better and stuff. So now I code the site, and a lot of that was down to because I could never get it the way I wanted using WordPress. Yeah. So I got fed up with it then, particularly like last year, where it's just like, no, I wanted to look this way. So I did it all again from scratch. So, but I enjoyed that. But I could see why for people, that's a huge challenge to kind of keep up to date with that, particularly as people use sites so much more on mobile devices and tablets and all that. You can't just kind of learn one thing and ignore that then of changes. Like, you have to keep kind of tracking what's actually happening. So definitely there are big challenges to it.
Yeah, and on the flip side then, what do you think? What's your favorite thing, or what do you think is the best thing about having the site you do?
I've always liked with the Irish stuff that, say, even the last Irish Open I was at, and say when Georgia Drummy won, and the year before when Pete Bothwell won, that I like the idea of giving players the attention that they deserve for doing something that is kind of sadly neglected everywhere else. So it was great kind of for Pete and Georgia. I don't mean it's great for them, but I liked being able to kind of, Georgia won, that Georgia at least gets someone to come and interview her and give her an article, and maybe, for her family or someone that, like, at least someone turned up and kind of gave her the attention she deserves for being like a brilliant player. And there's so many Irish players who put so much effort into this stuff. And, when they do things like that, when they win Irish Opens or they're playing Davis Cup or Fed Cup, that, why isn't anyone giving them some coverage? Like, like even just an article, even just something to show that they exist, that they're doing stuff. And I do like kind of when you can do some stuff like that. I mean, obviously the glamour stuff, if you get to interview top players and all, that's brilliant, and tournaments and all. But I think it's nice with that. I remember when James Kluski retired, and I did an article with him, and and James, what's it called? And Connor and Ireland and on Sam and stuff. But it's nice to at least be able to give some attention to people who really lack it in obviously an Irish country that's mad into almost all the other sports.
Yeah. And I was on that, like, you're mentioning obviously kind of giving them attention that they wouldn't get a lot of. So like, what's your view on just like the Irish public as kind of an audience of tennis specifically? Like, how do you think
the sad thing is I can't think of another phrase except that the sport is like irrelevant basically to the major Irish public. And I know even for being in media places that trying to push tennis into stuff is almost a losing battle. I remember once wanting to put a line into a radio show about Federer beating Nadal in Basel for the first time. Yeah. It was the first match he beat Nadal for 4 years or something like that in 2015. And it was just a line. It's like, oh, would you put that in, with the headlines or something else? And they wouldn't do it. And it's kind of, it's Federer and Nadal. But it would just kind of show you that it's very hard even to get coverage of Grand Slams, like, of talking about Djokovic and Serena and, et cetera, et cetera. It's very hard to get the superstars coverage in Ireland because we have so many sports and there's so little interest. So it's, it's a chicken and egg thing. If you don't cover tennis, people don't know about tennis. But then if people aren't interested in tennis, they don't want to necessarily listen to coverage or watch coverage of tennis. I would always be on the side more that you should try your best to cover the different sports, at least to a small degree. Of course, football and GAA and rugby are going to dominate and all, but you should kind of set aside a certain amount of time to cover those sports, because there is an audience for these sports. They're just not as big as the other ones. But yeah, unfortunately, I think compared to the vast majority of sports, tennis just does not feature in Irish life, apart from obviously the people who play, the percentage, and the 2 weeks, of course, of Wimbledon, when everyone's out in the parks, but then they all go again.
I guess I have to ask, what do you think could be done to improve that, to bring tennis more to the forefront a little bit?
Well, I was listening to, I've done loads of these things over the years, of doing like documentaries and talking to all the different like players and coaches and stuff. I listened to your podcast with Paul Casey, which is really good, and Paul's great and passionate about it. And he is absolutely right with the court surface, that it's horrendous and it has held players back here. I would think probably a combination is best, in terms of there are going to be loads of players, particularly doubles players of certain ages and all, who won't want to play on harder surfaces. And for clubs that can afford it in terms of size, if you have 8 courts, 12 courts, etc., that you'd probably need to have 2 surfaces. Like you probably need to have a certain amount of Omni Astro for players who are used to that and want to play it, and then either hard courts, indoor, or clay for performance players and coaches. But there's no doubt, like I have got to play in clay courts a few times, and you talk to coaches all the time, and I'm always interested in talking to coaches of different levels, and just the things of, say, you cannot show a kid properly how to hit a topspin serve, how to hit proper spin on a shot, because it won't respond on the surface and they won't know that they've hit it properly or not. And that's just an endless frustration. And of course, it's one of the funny things, if you can hit a decent kick serve, people kind of fall over on the other side of the net because they just haven't seen anything. And if you notice as well of how so many shots are just bunting shots on Omni turf, like, it is kind of, as Paul was saying, like just survival of if you can survive the mishits and stuff and get away with it. Like there aren't actually strokes, they're just kind of fiddly kind of things going on. Then the funding is an issue. I think I've always advocated, well, not always advocated as if I'm kind of this long-term hero of it. I've thought for a few years, having talked to people, that we should have a designated fund of support for the number one players. Something like even 20,000 or 30,000, pure, like completely with receipts and all, of just helping them go on the tour, pay for coaching. And it's almost like a reward for someone that, if you get to be Irish number one over, it could be over a 2-year period of ranking or whatever it is, that you get some support to have a go around the ITFs and all that stuff for the year. And I just think as an incentive, it would help. I just think because we do have that for podium placings in the other sports where, there is up to gold medal standard, obviously 50,000 and that kind of stuff. I just would like to give the players the opportunity to get that kind of reward. And, they might not improve their ranking or so, but it's just so hard at the moment if they don't have private sponsors or donors to help them to go to academies, etc. As Paul was saying as well, more matches, etc. Every coach I've ever spoken to, up to like Dave Miley from the ITFs, like they need to be playing more matches, they should be playing, etc. And he had a whole formula of all that. I think it was, I could be wrong now, it was in an article I did with him, but it's something like 70 good level matches a year or something, some kind of, or 70 or 100, something like very strong level matches or some sort of thing. It's I don't have it sounds really bad, Patrick. I don't have huge hope at the moment that things will change unless we kind of get those grassroots things right. What I would say is probably with Naas bringing in clay courts, one thing that's a bit exciting about these clubs and Devesh, is it's not like they're a panacea that are going to sort everything, but what is fantastic is that there will be, and they're very good junior coaching in Naas, but that there will be a 5 or 6 year old who will turn up to the club with their parents or whoever, and their first experience of tennis in Ireland would be on the clay court. Their first time hitting shots would be on a clay court, which has not been the case.
No.
And that's brilliant. Like that's kind of what you'd hope for, is that you will need that balance of people who can still play an Omni, but also for kids and coaches and all, and the performance players, that we train on clay or hard court because we need to develop their strokes and make them complete players. And I think that is probably the best chance going forward of some sort of hybrid combination of two surfaces.
Yeah, so you're very much saying that the best ways to kind of raise the profile of tennis among the public is to have one or two, successful players that will then bring the interest to the public.
Well, actually, one of the other things is there's getting tennis into schools and getting people to play tennis in schools.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of a harbinger of doom almost when I went into secondary school, and they had tennis courts which they ripped out the year before to put in five-a-side football pitches. Now, I did play lots of five-a-side at school and I loved it, but it was kind of just like, oh, well, they're like 6 whatever courts gone, that people aren't going to be playing tennis in school. Getting it into school is so important. I think getting the message out as well, which I always think is unique about tennis is one of the few sports that you can play your entire life. And you will always find a grade to play. Like everyone I know around my age or a bit older has to stop kind of playing football. Like, has to stop their sports just because, their knees or various injuries. They can't, even five-a-side and stuff, they can't really do that as much anymore. Whereas tennis is, and I know 80-year-old tennis players. Like, I have played with, I played with like last year, an 80-year-old tennis player. And it's just, you will always find a grade for yourself. And that's where I think you will still have to have some omni, because you want those people to be able to play and keep going, but you also want to serve the performance players and the kids and all, and coaches to, like, that's what I hope for most clubs, is that they can kind of, there's always that debate back and forth of, most members are there for maybe social purposes, but you do, I think, have to respect each side. The social purposes pay for the club, but the performance players are the ones who actually bring the sport forward, and you need to be able to appease both.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to bring it back to your kind of experience, another point, when you've kind of been doing interviews and you've been working at events, how approachable have you found players, and how have you found that experience of working as a media official in tournaments?
Well, I think there are certain, so obviously with Irish, one of the things when I was starting out, obviously Irish players are brilliant generally in terms of, and they've been so amenable to me. Like when I first started, I think James McGee was my first interview, and he was off injured. He was around 150 in the world or so. But I mean, it was great that I was able to get in touch with him and then text him, whatever like that. And then he met me for an interview, and there wasn't a big kind of, he's just a really nice guy. And then as I found when I interviewed more people, particularly in Ireland, that they're generally all just very nice people, and they're very happy to talk. At the tournament level stuff, it's much more obviously organized, and for the safety of the players as much as anything. So I have contacted agents to try to get interviews for stuff, and because I'm not because I'm not CNN and other bits like that, it can be hard going. That said, when you're at a tournament, if you're there and you give in your application and your form, then you will get to talk to the players and stuff. So it is really just getting at the tournaments. That's hard from an Irish point of view, because basically no places are going to support you for a media accreditation. I was kind of optimistic for this year for Wimbledon, after having gone last year, that I had a chance probably to get some accreditation this year, either through my site or someone else. Of course, that's been kind of cancelled for the moment, but it's one of the things that Irish people are at a disadvantage, no question, that if there isn't a lot of attention on tennis, there isn't a lot of coverage of tennis, so there are less media places inclined to give press accreditation to send people to go to these kinds of tournaments. So you kind of have to do what you can around the fringes of the stuff. But I think with players, particularly if you treat them professionally and all, like when I was at the stuff before, talking to those players, if you're professional, they're happy enough to talk. Like, I was never going to be, when I set up my site and the way I write about stuff, I was never going to be asking about, who your girlfriend or boyfriend is, what clothes you're wearing, all this kind of stuff. I was always interested in the tactical stuff, the mental stuff of like, how do you do this? How do you deal with that, etc. So I have found generally, particularly within the confines that you're dealing with, players are approachable, and they will talk to you and stuff, once you've gone through the proper channels.
Have you had any one or two that have been particularly nice and approachable, or maybe particularly difficult that you've found?
I suppose you wouldn't name... no, to be honest, I can't think of anyone who's particularly difficult. There's people, obviously, who it's not their first language, so, you might get off. But as I said, I suppose what I found surprising is when I interviewed, say, Timea Bavas, like, who's been world number 1 in doubles and has been top 20 in singles, that she's actually like one of the nicest people you'd ever meet in your life. Like she's just so nice. Like, and she sits down and talks to just a complete randomer, like, you know, in this country to talk about stuff. And I think a lot of them, I think a lot of them are extremely nice. Oh, yeah, one thing I would say particularly about Irish players, which is great, is they're so straightforward and honest and kind of it is what it is kind of stuff. So I think tennis players more than anyone know exactly what their level is, know exactly what the challenge is, and there's no nonsense with them about stuff. So you'll talk to Irish players and they'll tell you exactly what it is, and they were good at this, they weren't good at this is what the level was. And I love that. Like I love how they don't kind of hedge their bets and stuff, they just tell you the stuff. But no, I mean I can't think of, not in tennis. Now, in other sports, when I worked in sports places, players and stuff can be very difficult, awkward personalities. But no, from my experience of tennis so far, generally everyone's been, because okay, there are some players you might ask for an interview and they won't talk to you. And they mightn't be nice. I don't know, but I mean, they've made the decision anyway not to talk to you. Like, so you can't really judge them on that. But no, of the people I have spoken to, I can't think of anyone who's particularly nasty or anything like that.
You know, to look into the future then for you, what are your plans with Crosscourt View or with your other kind of lines of work?
I was going to set up a podcast, but you've taken over that period. With the site, I find this year kind of difficult because it's such a mess that I wanted to get back to writing more profiles and doing that kind of stuff and expanding the site. But this year's just kind of like a write-off. I mean, we're already into August anyway. So hopefully if we can get to some sort of order next year, I can go back to doing other stuff, or I can go back to kind of working on things. One thing from the site that you always want is, I found when I was doing news and stuff that there's no real point because there are so many sources for news, and you would spend, you know, your hour or whatever your time kind of getting your research right and doing a kind of news story like Federer's injured or et cetera, and it won't get anywhere, like, you know, so because there's just too much competition for that stuff. So my aim is always really in-depth profiles which do get good traction, and it's amazing with the site how there will be loads of people in Russia who will still read about a Kazakhina profile I did like 4 years ago or so. And you'll see, like, I did one of Borna Charic years ago, and that got shared around loads of places. And, you know, the in-depth profiles I like as well, because I usually would pick a player who might be kind of top 100-ish or 90 or so, young, and I would have seen them maybe, and I'd be kind of like, oh, they look promising. They look like they're going to be the real deal. And you've little to lose in a sense, because if they become a superstar, then you'll get huge hits and all that stuff because you're kind of ahead of the curve. You always get that thing in tennis of, say, like I did Rybakina a few months ago. Now, she had already done well at the end of last year, but you always get this point where these players who are up and coming, they'll beat one of the big players in the tournament, and then everyone on Google is like, who is Elena Rybakina? Like, you know. So I like the profiles and the tournament profiles and the kind of more long depth. I'll probably go back to interviews and stuff as well. But yeah, I think a lot of that stuff will probably be more into next year, probably depending, because I mean, there's a good chance that most of the tournaments this year will be kind of cancelled.
Yeah.
It's just, no, it's so precarious at the moment.
And probably even ones that go ahead will be trickier for you to go to.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I was going to go, you know, I had flights booked to Roland Garros, and I was going to go to Wimbledon, but I wouldn't travel to them now. Like, you know, I wouldn't. And there's loads of stuff I'm missing out on. You know, everyone is affected by these things. But there's also, I suppose, maybe there's a bit of a silly concept in tennis of all the people who live and breathe tennis all day think it's the most important thing in the world. And it is important and everyone loves it. But it's a global pandemic. Yeah. So, you know, with these players who kind of decide that, you know, like Nadal and say, and Ash Barty, you know, they weren't going to go to the US Open, that, you know, they are seeing the bigger picture. Like, you know, they don't really want to take the risks, and they're just not sure of the situation, and they can always play tournaments in the future. And I think with the tennis tour, the obsession with keeping the tournaments going, I understand that obviously there's financial incentives and all to do that, but it's a once in a generation, once in a century event. Yeah. And sport is a luxury. Like, you know, there are people really struggling, economies and countries and healthcare systems really struggling, and tennis is just so far down the priority list for that kind of stuff. That's why I wouldn't be surprised, and it's unfortunate because I'm sure the USTA are doing their absolute best with the tournament, but I wouldn't be surprised if a load more players just pull out, coming up to it, because they're just not comfortable. They're just not comfortable with it.
Yeah, I know your trips to Roland Garros and Wimbledon this year were called off, but in the past you've been to those. So of the slams, which have you been to, and which have you enjoyed most?
I've been to 3 of the 4. So I was at the US Open long time ago on J1 actually, but I was very lucky there. I got to see Federer and Anand when they were both number 1, and Arthur Ashe, so that was a bonus. Then I spent most of the first week of last year at Roland Garros and then Wimbledon, and they were really important and really eye-opening, and that I had a very definitive list of players I wanted to see. I wanted to spread it out as much as possible, so I had some kind of good stat I was happy with, of having seen like 25 or 30 of the top 50 women and like 20 of the top 50 men and stuff. But the objective was to see as many of the players as I possibly can. To you need to see how they produce shots, how they move, what it's like and all. I have seen good players over the years in various things, but I wanted to see like Karolina Mukova, and you wanted to see Karen Khachanov, and you wanted to see all these kind of players. On the women's side, it's so much easier because I suppose the winners have been spread out over the years, that there are more of them on outside courts, so you have a better chance of seeing them. So on outside courts in Wimbledon, as I would see like Sloane Stephens, Muguruza, Kvitova, etc. But you're also able to see Wawrinka on outside courts. But it's just it gives you a terrific window into, this is how players hit the ball, this is what they look like, this is the defense. And then it's interesting to go back to I think it was after Wimbledon, the Irish Open final over the week after, and just to see, if you want to see where those guys are and where the other guys are, it'll show you physicality and speed are almost more than anything. When you see the top 100 players, they are just so strong, both genders, and so fast in defense. Obviously there's huge power and all consistency, but they're physical specimens that just don't look like normal humans. Like they look like superheroes almost, as a callback to your opening. And I remember it actually at a Davis Cup years ago when Ireland played Finland, and Jarkko Niemann was playing, and he was top 50 at the time. He'd been top 50 for 10 years, and he didn't look like normal people. Like, he looked like something special. Like, he was kind of 6'2" or 3" and had a glow about him almost. Like, and obviously he's a brilliant player, but they are just superhuman athletes. And to get an appreciation of that is great at the tournaments. And so, I can't wait till whenever things are kind of a bit more normalized to go back to all of them, and obviously Australian Open's definitely on the list.
So what's your best memory from an event you've been to?
I think the most I'd say the two actually at Roland Garros, I was front row in Sumo Machu, their new small court, to see Wawrinka, and I still probably have never seen anything like watching him, as if you're at the fence in Temple Oak watching someone for 3 hours. Just the power and the ability. But then the Thursday at Wimbledon, where I was so lucky to get into court 1, and you had Federer, Williams, Kvitova, Murray playing, and just to see, I saw Federer years and years ago, but to see him, you'd never get fed up with him. But I think to see him, and obviously just the accuracy and the movement, but then Serena as well, who Serena's serve is just magnificent, like in real life. And if you've any appreciation for technical stuff, and if you play a bit yourself and all that kind of thing, that you're just watching perfection. That's a perfect serve. And I think I think they're the two of, I was so lucky on the Thursday, and I think that might be something I'll be lucky my whole life to have seen those two, because you don't know how long they'll be around if that would happen again. And then just to see Stan of you can kind of get to see all these people. Say that is the lucky, and I'd say to people as well, when tournaments, if they come back and all, is get a day pass to a tournament if you're in one of the cities at the time. They're like 20-25 euro. I was able to get, I was front row to watch Andreescu on an outside court in the middle of nowhere in Roland Garros, and I was just there with her coaching team basically. And she'd already won Indian Wells, and she'd obviously go on and win the US Open. But you can see unbelievable players all over these grounds for €20, €25, and you can sit as close to them as you would down your local club, and there's nothing like it. It's an incredible experience.
So of the events you've been to, and maybe choose an event that's not a Grand Slam, which one would you recommend most a visit to?
Well, actually, the ones I'd love to go to more, I'd love to try things like Rome and Madrid, because I've been to Madrid as a city and all. I think what's most successful to people, because I think the joint tournaments are better than the single gender tournaments in terms of you have a much better spread of people to see, and there's always somewhere to go. Like, you've 12, 16 courts there, and you'll be seeing someone good on all of them. So that is probably why I'd prefer Roland Garros to Wimbledon for accessibility and ease. Obviously, used to, for people, they could book their tickets for Roland Garros in March and, fly over if they're in Paris anyway. And the ones I'd like to explore more, would be actually more the tour events. So I would probably be looking to sometime get to Rome and Madrid. Because as joint tournaments where that all the top players are going to be there.
And so to look at kind of just tennis for a little bit, I know you're maybe skeptical about events happening in 2020, but what do you maybe see happening if events do go ahead? Who do you see maybe coming through and winning the US Open today?
Well, I'm not stunned that Djokovic is going to play it anyway. The thing that changed everything was the rankings announcements a few months ago, where they switched to an elongated calendar. That meant that how players did at the last two Grand Slams at the end of last year counted the same. So basically, Rafa couldn't add any more points this year because he won Roland Garros in the US Open, which obviously meant that he didn't need to go if he didn't want to. So I think that was fair with the rankings, that they wouldn't penalise people who weren't comfortable playing. Absolutely. But they did give an opportunity to people who wanted to add points who maybe didn't do so well. It's a really strange. I mean, the women's draws are always up in the air. Just generally, it's very hard to predict them. But with 5, I think it's at least 4 of the top 10 aren't going to be playing. Serena's already back. I would presume the likelihood is that the players who are based in America or who have already travelled over to America are going to play the US Open, and the European players, particularly the ones at the Prague Open this week, they're the ones who I wonder, will they go? So with the women's draw, I could certainly see Serena being, thereabouts as per usual. With the men's, with who's left, because obviously you've no Federer, no Nadal, your favourites are going to be Djokovic and Thiem, obviously. The big incentive for players a little further down the rankings, given the pullouts and all, is it is going to be this unusual event where players who probably were never going to be near a quarter or semi-final might make a quarter or semi-final. And that's huge in terms of obviously ranking points and money. But the thing is, it's just, I would have, people have debated this about whether there be an asterisk around the tournament. I would put an asterisk around the tournament because I think a lot of the essential elements of a Grand Slam are missing this year, in terms of obviously the pool of players, but we haven't had a season. So it isn't the test of the usual kind of stamina and finding your form at the best time that it would before. There's no crowd. So there isn't the test of, do you flourish with the pressure of fans or do you wilt with the pressure of fans? And they're big aspects of Grand Slams, as you always see through the years. But then there's also just the concern of the controls and restrictions all the time for players, that it's very hard for the players to go there and not be thinking about their movements all day and trying to avoid people and, their team, etc. and all. So I think it is just like, these are the pandemic Grand Slams kind of stuff, but they're not, I wouldn't think of them in the same way as a normal year's Grand Slams because they're so unusual. They're so strange. And I have heard talk as well about, should there be best of 5 sets for the men's, given that there hasn't been a tour? I could understand that argument of it might be just too risky on their bodies, that, they haven't had the tour to build up their strength. Like, they've just been playing primarily themselves or exhibitions. And what happens if we get a spate of injuries in the men's early on? Because, obviously best of 5 is so grueling and it continues to get more grueling every year. And what would you be then? Would it, say if we have lots of the top players are gone from the men's draw. Then the top players that enter, and then a few of them get injured after, second or third round in 5 sets. And then you're left with kind of, no offense to them, because obviously they're excellent players, but, you could be 25 in the world against 40 in the world, kind of stuff in the quarters and semis.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, look, these are brilliant players. I'm not saying, it's not like I didn't get into the draw, it's not that kind of situation. But there are so many issues hovering around it that it's hard not to think of this as a, just one-off kind of thing, or like an unusual tournament that you wouldn't think of in the same way as normal Grand Slams.
Yeah, now to touch on Serena there, do you see her reaching 24, passing 24? Where do you see her finishing up?
Well, she's obviously a great chance if she can play this. She's always brilliant at the US Open. In fairness to her, that with all the stuff about will she get to 24 or not, she has gotten to multiple finals, putting herself in the position. She's been outplayed generally in the finals. Andreescu was outstanding. Obviously, Halep was outstanding. Kerber was excellent. That it's a brilliant opportunity for her. If you think of, say, there won't be Barty, there won't be Svitolina, there won't be who else? Not sure, the other 2 or 3 who aren't going to go. Halep is a bit up and down with it. I think she might be still entered in it, but I'm not sure if she'll actually go, etc. It's an amazing opportunity for, obviously, if there's a weekend draw. She's usually brilliant at the US Open. She's playing quite well at the moment. So yeah, I could definitely see if she plays it, if it goes ahead and she plays it, she probably will be favourite. And I wouldn't be surprised at all then if she equals a 24. But she wants 25. I mean, she doesn't just want to have the 24 alongside Margaret Court. She wants to be out on her own. So that's probably even more interesting. She might win this. But what will happen with Roland Garros, and what will happen when we can kind of have tournaments back again? One of the big concerns would obviously be that if the US Open, say, didn't go ahead, though it looks like it will now, is that you would have Roland Garros and then you'd have nothing until the next Roland Garros.
Yeah.
Just by the way, because Melbourne looks very ropey at the moment.
So to move even past COVID times and look at the women's game a little bit more, there's obviously hasn't been a dominant player, you'd say, in the last maybe 4 to 5 years. It's been a lot of slam winners. Do you see that continuing, or do you see maybe a 2 or 3 players emerging that will rack up a lot of titles over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I probably, bear in mind, I've written so many previews to women's Grand Slams and all, and just been way off all the time. Usually you go from, you have a collection of 8 players and it becomes like 15 players, and then you hope for the stuff. But then you have someone like Sophia Kenin who wins, and it's Sophia Kenin's a really good player, but I didn't think she'd win a Grand Slam this quickly. I would think at the moment, but you could also say of the men's, when it's finished, when the lads have gone, that it's very open then. And who do you think will be dominating? Will there be someone who's dominating? I don't know. I suppose all the hype and excitement, and she is a special talent, would be Coco Gauff. Now, she's still so young and she still has a lot to do, but her mental strength for her age and her record against players above her is incredible. And almost, if you're going on about one thing about her that's special, is her mental resilience, which is kind of everything almost. Like, you can have all the talent and the speed and endurance and all, but if you can keep things going and write the problems during a match and just, find a way to eke it out. I mean, look how well that's worked for Novak Djokovic. Now, I wouldn't go mad with her of, she's going to win 20 Grand Slams and all that kind of stuff, etc. But she's a very special talent. I think people as well, I would say it's more likelihood, of there will be swapping around. I think someone like Simona Halep, she's so fit, she's such a fighter, she'll always be there. I think she's just someone who will perennially be in the last 4 of tournaments, and she'll win a few and she'll lose some. Someone like Kvitova might have a good couple of weeks again sometime at like a US Open or Wimbledon Australia or Wimbledon. But it's really wide open. I hope that Andreescu can kind of get back to some sort of fitness. She got over a knee issue, and now she's a foot problem. She's an extremely exciting player, and the level she reached against Serena and stuff, like, she just has everything in her game. A bit like Osaka, of course, as well. I think Osaka's another one like Halep, where I would expect that she'll just be thereabouts in tournaments for the next 5-10 years or so. She's just she's so many weapons, and she's super fit and all stuff. So I think maybe what you might have is a group of 2, 3, 4 players who will always kind of be around somewhere, but then there'll always be the room for people like Sofia Kenin to come through, and Vondrousova to come through, and as Ostapenko came through and all that. There will be those kind of players who pop up. One I'm very excited about is probably Mukova. I think she's such an unusual type of player who has a good serve and can volley and has lots of variety and big forehand and all. I think one of the great things about how the tour has changed probably is because the courts are slower and there's so many more baseline rallies, it has forced players to be a bit more creative and to do things differently, to add in more angles and drop shots and approach to the net, and kind of add a bit more variety to their game is almost forced just to get out of the bang 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 nature of the rallies. So I think that is really encouraging. There's a lot of young female players with lots of variety around the top 10, 20, 30.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a tough one to predict, but there's it'll just be interesting to see, I think, how it turns out over the coming years. But just a couple more questions, Stephen. I really appreciate your time today. If you were to give some advice to people that were maybe some budding tennis journalists, keen in tennis, and maybe would be interested in covering it in kind of a similar capacity maybe to yourself, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I think you have to have a lot of passion for it, because it will take a while for things to get moving in the way you want. I think you have to expect that you will put a lot of work into some stuff at the start, and your mother will be the main person who reads it, before you get going. That you have to keep at it. Don't get too obsessed with. There'll always be these stories about phenomenons of different areas of social media and all this kind of stuff, and they have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, etc. That the absolute vast majority for everyone is that's not how it happens. You have to work away at it for a while and hopefully get some exposure or so. The worry would be, probably even in the time since I did it or started my site, is there's just so much competition for everything that to get, even if you're very good, to get some attention, to get some eyeballs to the stuff is so difficult. To build up a presence, to find attention is so hard. So it's kind of, if your heart is set on it, obviously you can't put someone off their heart being set on it. But I think what I found as well is, particularly in Ireland, it's very hard, if not impossible, that'll be your sole income stream of just being a tennis journalist in Ireland. You do other stuff. So I do other stuff. I'm a graphic designer and I write about other stuff, etc. Now I have at times given all my time and attention to tennis, and I still follow it all the time and do stuff and figure around Grand Slams, but I have to do other things to support it. So I think it's almost like you don't go into this with a kind of a fragile concept. I think you kind of, I'm not saying it's a vocation thing, but you kind of have to know this is what you want to do, and it will be hard, and you're probably not going to be driving a BMW, and it's kind of it's a tough old slog. And if you work in media places, like when I worked with the researchers and News Talk, and when you're in RT and all that kind of stuff, people work really, really hard. It's a hard job, and if you're doing new stuff as well, you take it home with you. It doesn't kind of stop, particularly with tennis tournaments where the hours can be obviously crazy with Australia and US times and all that. It will be, you really want to eat and drink it kind of stuff. Now, your passion would override those concerns, obviously, because you just love it. So say when I was particularly at Roland Garros last year, it's the greatest 4 or 5 days I can remember almost having. I was more than delighted to be there for 12 hours of the day. And I was almost on the verge of tears when I went out the last night, that I was can I not just stay here forever? I can't get enough of watching and being part of all of it, or not being part of it, but just being in that kind of situation and environment. But I think if it is the thing that you have to do, you should pursue it, but you might have to pursue it along with something else you're doing, and then just kind of it's absolutely easy to set up a site, particularly if you're using like WordPress or, kind of Wix or all that kind of stuff. So there's no issues. It's really cheap to set up a site. It's very easy to set up a site like that. Now, with reservations, obviously, it'll be a theme, etc. That's the way it looks. But if you want to, I want to write an article and I want to have it on the website, you can do that. You can do it in a day. But I mean, you could do that this week. In terms of you write your article, you can get it set up, etc. But the big thing is keeping at it, and that's the hardest thing of setting up a site. These statistics at times, like the amount of people who set up a site or do stuff like that, and then the amount of people who stop doing anything on it after like a year or 2 years, etc. And it's huge, obviously. So keeping at it is almost one of the biggest things of trying to keep producing articles or podcasts or whatever it is, or videos on YouTube, whatever that you're doing, and just building up and just, grabbing a few more followers, a few more subscribers at the time, and building up, and then hoping that maybe you'll get your kind of chances of breaks. So like when I was doing some Wimbledon previews years and years ago, someone on Spin was Googling for like someone in Ireland who wrote about tennis, and then found my articles and contacted me. And that's the first radio stuff I ever got, was on one of the Spin shows, just doing a few hits during Wimbledon, I don't know, 2015 or 2016 or something. And just kind of, here's what's going on. And then that led to some more RTE stuff. Then again, someone was looking for someone like me, I guess. And I got in to do Sean O'Rourke of just a Wimbledon kind of update. And then things led from there. But you only get that if you keep going at it. And that's the hardest thing, is to keep at it. It's almost like, I suppose, a tennis player. Yeah, the hardest thing is to keep grind every day. But it is the same, probably, concept, loosely anyway, for tennis journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wise words. There's a final question. What's your favorite thing about tennis? What kind of keeps you going in tennis?
Thing that keeps me going playing is my forehand. Those rare moments when you catch it great. Watching, I love creativity and variety, I suppose. So I was always drawn to people like Federer and Enan and stuff. I mean, in some ways I love all of it, but I particularly love watching all around complete players. And I could watch them all day, and I love the variety of stuff. Say when you go around watching players at the tournaments, of they don't just have two shots, they don't just have the certain way of hitting the ball, that they can kind of just adapt to the situation and do various things. And I love that. I think if you can find joy in watching players all the way down the rankings who just do things a little bit differently than the norm. And I love that. And I love when you see someone who comes along who's 150 in the world or whatever, and they do something that you haven't really seen exactly like that before. So I do love that. I love players who can kind of push the norms or accepted habits of tennis, and they don't have to be the kind of gods. They can just be, players who just do something a little bit differently to what you're used to. So I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could give all kinds of answers for that, but yeah, I think creativity, just the constant renewal of creativity in tennis, is kind of something that will keep me going.
Brilliant, yeah, brilliant. I think we'll leave it there, Stephen. Just a big thanks again for your time, and just want to wish you well, I guess, for the rest of the year and going forwards in whatever you find yourself doing. Good luck, and a big thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Adam, and well done on your successful Irish tennis updates.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. A big thanks again to Stephen for his time and his really great insights into Irish tennis and the life of a tennis journalist in Ireland. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please comment, subscribe, like, and tell a friend. I believe the best way to help more people discover the show is word of mouth. So if you know anyone who you think might be interested, please consider passing it on. I'd also love to hear what you thought of this episode. So if you have any feedback, feel free to send me an email at irishtennisupdates@gmail.com. That's all for this episode, and until next week, I've been Adam, your host. Stay safe and goodbye.